So hello everyone and welcome to Advanced Webinar Techniques. So this is for people who have pretty much gone past their first webinar, or you may be thinking about doing your first webinar, but you're looking at something which is beyond the basics. So there's a lot of material in the eGurus Vault about the basics. You can download the full Webinar Smarts book there as an eGurus member. You can also download or get an ebook called Your Very First Webinar, and there's a webinar recording called Your Very First Webinar, which will help you with your very first webinar. But what I want to do today is, because there are a number of people now who've gone beyond just the basics and they want to know where to go next with the webinars. So we're going to cover a lot of things today. I've set aside 90 minutes today. You may have noticed that in the webinar invitation rather than the normal hour. Feel free to leave if you find that you've got the value that you wanted to and you don't need to stay for the rest of it. That's fine. The recording will be available later. And today is very much going to be about a how-to. So if you want me to demonstrate anything, I'm happy to do that. If you want to ask detailed specific questions, then feel free to do that as well. And I guess the other thing I should say is that if other people are asking detailed questions and you're not interested in them, just please be patient, because I do want to make this as useful as possible so that you get the answers in this session rather than necessarily having to go elsewhere to get the answers. That said, there may be some things where it makes sense for you to go elsewhere, and I'll refer you to places where you can find other information if you need to. So, just a broad overview of what we're going to cover today. We've got quite a number of different topics, and this came from a survey that I sent out towards the end of last week to the people who had registered at that time about what you'd like to know most about advanced webinar techniques. And broadly, I've organized these in the order of priority in the popularity of the topic. So people want to know, how can you be more engaging in a webinar? That was by far the biggest and the most popular question. Then what you do if you want to go beyond just PowerPoint, so how can you do multiple windows? A number of people want to know about facilitating, so using webinars for facilitating discussions. A couple of people want to know about webinar series, so how do you set up a series of webinars rather than just one-off webinars? And then there was the stuff around payment. So the first part was, how do you take payment for webinars? And then how do you run webinars that actually sell? So you promote, so you're running free webinars, but they're promotional. And related to that is how you follow up. What sort of follow-up can you do after your webinar? And the other one that I had on my list, but was not as common, but people asked about, was about multiple presenters. So how can you run a webinar where it may be not just you? As a presenter, you may be interviewing somebody, you may be the guest of somebody else, you may be the moderator, or somebody else may be moderating yours. So that's broadly what we're going to cover today. As I said, we've got an hour and a half altogether to cover that. Please do take part. As I said, I'd love you to contribute, and I know there are people who've got quite a bit of experience with webinars here, so it's not only my ideas today. If you want to contribute your ideas as well, please just raise your hand in the control panel, and I'll turn your microphone on, or just type your questions in the question box, and I'll do my best to just keep an eye on the question box and read out questions that people are typing in, or comments or contributions that people are making. All right, so let's get started with the first of our 8 topics. So let's start by talking about how to be more engaging in a webinar. So what can you do to be more than just speak for 45 minutes and take 5 minutes of questions, which a lot of webinars, unfortunately, are like that. So I want to give you some guidelines and then some actual tools that you can use to increase engagement in your webinars. So the first one is, like, just broadly 6 guidelines to make your webinars more engaging in general. And this is like high-level stuff. So the first thing is, just make sure that you're solving their problems or meeting their challenges or answering their questions. And you know, I did this. So for this webinar, I sent out a survey beforehand saying, what would you most like to know about? And I've already told you that I've already organized the webinar in the order that you wanted to most learn stuff. I've also told you that you can leave early if you want to. So I'm making sure that I can solve the real question or answer the real questions that you've got, or solve the real problems that you have, rather than me trying to guess what they are. And this is just such an easy thing to do. If you want to know about survey tools that you can use, all I did was I just sent out an email and said, click reply. You can use other things like SurveyMonkey if you want to get more formal feedback about what you should talk about in your webinar. Most webinars are about education or information, as opposed to, and you can put in there persuade as well if you want to, so educate, inform and persuade, as opposed to inspire. So it's very hard to take a keynote and deliver that by webinar. I've seen some people try to do that, and it hasn't really worked very well because it's difficult to be that to create that sort of environment, the sort of keynote environment using webinars. But most people will attend webinars thinking that they want to learn something or get some information or be persuaded. Use more visuals in your webinars, because we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but your webinar slides are the visuals in your webinar, unlike an in-person presentation where the visuals you may have other visual aids, including you and the stage and props and the walls and flip charts and whiteboards. With webinars, all you've got in terms of visuals is a slide presentation. And if you look around your office now, you'll see that there's so many distractions for you as an audience member. There's so many distractions that I have to overcome to get you to pay attention. And a big part of that is just the visuals, because you can still be distracted and doing stuff like checking email while you're listening to me. But if the only way for me to keep you engaged on the screen and on my webinar visuals is to have a lot of them. And I'll give you a few more hints about that later. Take out all the fluff. So it's okay to have the occasional puzzle, joke, story, those sort of things, as long as they're engaging. But take out anything else take out anything that's irrelevant, because people really want value in their webinars. Do some interactive stuff, and I'm going to do that very soon. I'm going to show you some examples of interactive stuff that you can do. And also, there's really no substitute for practice. And I know there's some people here who've done webinars for, well, at least 2 years, I think, looking at the names of some of the people here. And it really is one of those things where practice does help. If not make perfect, it certainly makes progress. So just do more webinars. And I do now about 10 to 12 webinars a month in various forms. So some of them are these eGurus webinars, some of them are free public webinars, some of them are training for websites, some of them are preparation for workshops coming up. And just because you do more of them, you just get better at them. Okay, so let's look at how you can actually, some tools. So those are broad guidelines. Let's look at some tools. And broadly, what these tools are about is about shifting energy. So this is one of the things that I do very rarely, which is just have a slide with just a bullet list. In fact, this is a bullet list. But I've got 20 things here that you can do in a webinar to shift energy. Now, I'm just going to just stop talking for about 10 or 15 seconds. You can have a look at that. And then I just want you to, I don't want to go through all 20, but anything that you want to ask me about or you want to comment on, just raise your hand in the control panel. Or actually, in this case, you may just put in a number in the question box, and I'll explain that in a bit more detail if you want me to. Okay, so number 15, so Jenny's asking about quiet reflection. So there may be times in a webinar where you do want to just stop talking for a while. So I've done this just now, and it's only for like 10 or 15 seconds, but I've also run a coaching webinar, and Jenny, I think you've been on it, where you have, I run this at the end of every year to help you plan your online strategy for the following year. And broadly what I do is I ask a whole bunch of questions, and there's 27 questions altogether, and I group them in 9 lots of 3. And after each set of 3 questions, I say, here are the 3 questions, and then I'll stop talking for 60 to 90 seconds to give the audience time to write down their answers to the questions. It can be a bit unnerving when you do that as a presenter, because you just want to jump in and say stuff. It's a little bit easier when you're in an in-person presentation where you can see people with their heads down taking notes or writing answers. So just bite your tongue and give people time. So you don't have to do it all the time, but this is something that I have done from time to time, where you give people reflection time. When you get good at webinars and when you feel confident doing it, what you can also do is stop the recording at that point. So that's actually what I do. So like I'll ask the 3 questions, I'll stop the recording for that 60 seconds, and then I'll restart the recording when I want to start speaking again. You just have to remember to start and stop the recording each time. The only reason I do that is because somebody watching the recording, then they don't have to wait 60 seconds. They can just pause, take as long as they want, and then continue. So it's just to help the people with the recording. So that's a quiet reflection one. Amanda says number 12, so multiple windows. So we're going to talk about multiple windows soon. So that is where you have not just PowerPoint, but you can show your web browser and Microsoft Word documents, PDFs, and so on. So we will get to that. Okay, so Anne's asking about chat room. Yeah, which is number 18 on group exercises. So yes, so chat room is where you have got that there is a webinar, depending on what software you're using, there can be you can get people to communicate in the chat room. So this is something that, in fact, GoToWebinar doesn't promote that very much, but I have seen webinars where people are chatting away while the presenter is speaking. You can also do it, even if your webinar software doesn't allow it, you can do it by opening up a Twitter back channel. So you just say use this hashtag, and on your screen you can show the Twitter window, and people can see what other people are saying there in the chat. I don't use it very much. I think it's a little bit distracting. I have seen it in very big group webinars where the presenter is speaking and there may be hundreds of people on the webinar and they're chatting away among themselves. And they know that the presenter isn't looking at the chat room, because that's the one danger or the one risk with using the chat room, is that people will try to send you messages in the chat room, but you might miss it because there's so much chat going on. So if you're using a chat room, just tell people, look, the chat room's there for you to talk during the webinar, and you're welcome to share your ideas and comments, but also tell them that there's some other way that they should be talking to you, like raising their hand or typing a question in the question box or sending something to the moderator. Group exercises. So this is so number 19 here. Anne's asking about. This is obviously group exercises difficult to do when everybody is in a separate office or room. But if you're presenting to a group where there are people in a group sitting together, you can get them to do a group exercise just like you would do in a normal workshop. So I did this last night. In fact, I was speaking to the National Speakers Association of Queensland, presenting at their chapter meeting, where I was beamed in, but everybody else was in the same room. And in some corporate settings, this is appropriate because you may be running a webinar and you may have 5 attendees officially on the webinar, but actually each attendee has you beamed into their conference room or their boardroom. And if you know that's going to happen, then you can actually do the same sort of things that you would do if in an in-person presentation. And they appreciate that because they don't want to just be sitting there silently doing nothing. They want to be able to participate as well. So Jenny's asking, no dangers of losing people's attention to something else. Was that related to something I said, Jenny? I'm happy for you to raise your hand if you want to clarify your question there, Jenny. Yeah, and Hugh asked the same question about group exercises. Okay, number 7 is learning channels. So this is just it's a broad term for different ways that people learn. And if you think about broadly, if you think about the Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, so there's some people are visual, some people are auditory, some people are kinesthetic, so they're the basic ones, but also some people learn are numerate, so they like numbers, so they like stats and graphs and pie charts. Other people want to see pictures and diagrams. Other people want to do that. There might be intrapersonal as opposed to interpersonal. So intrapersonal people will want to know how this affects them. So they want to know the goals and objectives and outcomes of the webinar. They want to know like takeaway stuff and how it affects them as you go. The interpersonal people, they want to do stuff like group exercises, and they also like things like polls. In fact, Anne and I were chatting the other day because Anne does a lot of webinars as well, and it's just amazing how much people love polls. So this is number 1 on the list. So if you run an audience poll, it does a couple of things. Of course, it gets the audience actually interacting, and it also gives you valuable information that you can use during your webinar. But the other thing it does is it shows people who's in the room, and I think people like polls for that reason. They know that they want to, like, if you give them 4 options, they know which category they fall into, and they know which sort of people are in the room, and other people in that same category. So that's what I mean by learning channels, Amanda. It's a concept that Matt Church and I, we kind of brainstormed together, and we came up with this idea of 9 learning channels based on these ideas, based on Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. So if you can either look up the multiple intelligences stuff, or in the eGuru's Vault, if you download the Webinar Smarts book, it goes through the learning channels and talks about things you can do for each learning channel. So the idea there is you just shift channel. So if you're a really visual person, then you might be thinking of only doing visuals, but if you have this list of this checklist of 9 things that you can use, you may not use them all, but it gives you an idea, gives you ideas for adding diversity and variety. Graham asks, does multiple windows get too complicated? I don't think it does, Graham, but I'll give you some tips about that a little bit as we go when we reach that area. Anne's asking about music. Is there anything specific you want to ask about that, Anne? Again, feel free to raise your hand. I know you have got a microphone. So, okay, I can see that. Let me do that. Turn your mic on.
Yeah, I'd like to know about using music in webinars. I use music in my live presentations. I usually put it on while people are doing an activity. But I was concerned about, well, I'm interested to know how you could use music in a webinar in terms of the practicalities of it, the logistics or the technology of it. Wouldn't it distort? You know, do you put a disc in your computer and just play it, or how do you actually do that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Anne, because typically if you try to do that, if you put a disc in your computer or you try to play an MP3 file that you've got on your computer, it won't work because it only comes out through your speaker, so you can hear it, but it's not going in through the microphone. So the only time when I've used audio, in fact, I don't even think it was music. I think it was an audio clip that I played. I had it on. This is very low tech, but I had it on my phone, and then I held up the phone to the microphone and just pressed play, so it would go out through the microphone. So that's the technologically, that's the logistics side of it. There are some webinar technologies that will allow you to play like video and audio, and then they make sure that the audio gets piped through to the attendees as well. But if you don't have that, and I don't think GoToWebinar will let you do that, because all it does is just shares whatever's on your screen and plays whatever goes through your microphone. Then just do it the low-tech way, just play it out through your phone into the microphone.
That doesn't distort?
No, it's just like voice. It's so if my voice isn't being distorted, then there's no reason why music should be distorted either.
Okay.
That should work. Graham says, I've seen chat rooms used very effectively. Great. If there's anything that you want to specifically describe, Graham, please feel free to raise your hand and be happy to do that. Okay, I'll just bring you into the conversation, Graham. Hello, Graham, are you there?
Yeah, I am, Gihan. You can hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you fine.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a US, and I can't remember what technology they used, but there was about 200 people on the line, and we were all put into groups of about 4, and we were given things to I guess discuss or resolve in a 2-minute time, and I was quite surprised, you know, how involving it was. I was grouped with a guy from the US and one from Switzerland, and it worked very well. It worked very well.
Yeah, and so that sounds like, Graham, that technology allowed them to set up private chat rooms for each group of 4, didn't they?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen technology that does it. I think Illuminate, so Illuminate but starting with an E instead of an I think that allows you to do that. So it's where you can break up your audience into little groups and they can interact. Obviously, they can't interact out loud, but they can interact in chat rooms like that.
Yeah, yeah, it worked well.
Great. Thanks, Graham. And that also actually relates to a couple of questions that other people have asked with group exercises, where you can do stuff like that if your webinar technology allows you to do that, where even though people are remote, they can still interact as a group. Thanks, Graham. So Anne also says, I've seen chat rooms work where there's a moderator as well as a presenter, and the moderator monitors the chat room and reads comments from time to time. Absolutely. I think if you're going to use a chat room as a presenter, and actually keep an eye on the chat room, if you've got any sort of reasonable size audience, you basically have to have somebody else who's monitoring the chat room for you. So you have a moderator or a host where you're the presenter and they look after the chat and the questions. Jenny's question earlier about losing people's attention was related to number 15. So if I think let me phrase it the way I think Jenny's asking. So if you allow time for quiet reflection, is there a danger that you're going to lose people to do something else? And the answer is yes. And so I've discovered this. I've done this for 3 years now, where I've done this webinar at the end of each year, this coaching webinar, and I've realized over time that I just need to be much more precise with my framing when I set up the webinar. So I tell people, so now this is what I do, and I actually have a slide that says, here's what we're going to do, and then I talk them through it before we jump into it. So I tell them that they're going to get 60 to 90 seconds. I tell them that for some people that's going to be a little bit too long, so just feel free if you want to do other stuff, just have other stuff handy if you want to do that. I also I don't remember whether I did this from the very first one, but most of the time I will tell people, raise your hand when you've finished. So not to turn microphones on, but for me to get a gauge of how many people have finished. And generally, when I get to about 80% finished, so if the questions were really easy and most people have done them pretty quickly, then I won't wait the full 60 seconds. The other thing that I've done is set up a little countdown timer. So if you can imagine on my, if I had on this slide a little timer down here in the bottom right corner that said, 1 minute to go, and it would count down in increments of, say, 10 seconds. So that would then count down to 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. So people can see on the screen how much time I've got set aside. You can do that if you know you're always going to set aside that amount of time. And it's very easy to do. It doesn't need any fancy technology. It's just using PowerPoint, where you just have an animation. So you just have the 1 minute, then the 50 seconds, the 40 seconds, and you just get them changing every 10 seconds. So I have done that, and that seems to work quite well for when you set aside time for quiet reflection. Okay, so this is exactly the way I want to run this, by the way, folks. So if you want to ask questions or comment, then please do that. I love it when people share their experiences as well, because mine aren't the only ones that people are using. Any other questions or comments? Oh, okay, number 5, can you talk about puzzles, Janelle asks. Okay, so this puzzle thing that I've got here is an example of something that you might do to get people going at the start. Okay, most webinars still are really boring because they're generally like 45 to 50 minutes of someone talking, maybe a few minutes of questions, and quite often the questions aren't even people asking questions out loud, they're just written questions. So I reckon especially as we are professional presenters, that we should try to do something to get people used to the idea, sitting up and getting used to the idea that, hey, this is going to be a little bit different from most webinars that I attend. So what are you going to do at the start? The obvious thing is a poll. So lots of people use polls at the start, and that's good. As I said, people do like them. I saw Dave Kasukis recently. He uses optical illusions. So he shows a couple of slides with optical illusions on them, which is great for webinars because webinars are really visual tools. So you can show a slide with an optical illusion and there's a little bit of a puzzle in it or something in there. You may do something else. So some people are really good at telling stories. So they tell a really good story early on. So it can't be very long, but they tell a really good story early on. And that's what they use. One of the things I like using is puzzles, because I love puzzles. I love those sort of logical puzzles, or just sort of thinking puzzles. So I scour the internet and I gather puzzles that I like, and I look at ways of using them in a webinar context. And I just happen to have one here, so let's do one. So I'm glad Janelle asked about that, and if she hadn't, I think I would have done this anyway. So look, here's a puzzle. So there's a castle in the middle of a moat, and you have to storm the castle to free the princess. And there are hostile invaders on the other side, and the moat is full of moat monsters. Okay, and you've got to figure out how to get across the moat. And what you've got to do is build a bridge to get across the moat. And the moat is 10 meters wide at every corner. So it's rectangular, so it's 10 meters on every side. You've got these wooden logs, but each of them is only 9.5 meters long. Okay, and you've got no glue or rope stick them together to make them any longer. So you've got these 9.5 meter wooden logs, and you've got to use them to build a bridge to cross the moat. Okay, so how would you do that? So let's do this as a real puzzle. If anyone has any ideas of how to do that, can you please type them in the question box? So the idea is you've got to build a bridge. So it's not like sit on the log and use it to row across the moat. How can you use those to build a bridge to cross the moat to get to the castle? So can you tie them together? No, you can't. Okay, so this is an example of a puzzle that I used in a webinar that I did recently, which had a number of we had about 150 people on the line, and I did have a moderator, and she was reading out the comments as they came through, and so that was good because it really helped. It helped me because she was reading it out, so we had the two voices and so on. So a couple of answers that a couple of things that people are saying. Does the depth of the moat matter? No, it doesn't. We're just going to go across the surface. Building a pyramid in the corner, and so Jenny's answer is actually that's the right one. So then the next one, the next slide I had showed the answer, so you can see it here, where you can use these two to cross the moat. Okay, so you can align the logs this way. So if you're going to use a puzzle like that, it's got to have a point. Okay, and that webinar that I was doing was for Dynamic Business Magazine, and we were talking about social media. And I was saying, look, there are different ways to do social media, and what I'm going to suggest to you is a two-step approach rather than jumping in and thinking that you have to spend an hour every day on social media. So this sort of two-step approach worked perfectly because that's exactly what that was relevant to the puzzle. So the idea of using a puzzle is just that. It's just something interactive, different. It's not quite an icebreaker because it's got to be relevant. So something that you do early on to get people going and expecting something slightly different from this webinar compared to all the others that they've ever seen in their life. And so other people had other answers as well. So like Jenny says, pole vaulting. And so that's good. Like when the moderator reads out those sort of answers, that's fantastic. It just makes it, again, more interesting and engaging. So Jenny asked, where do I get the puzzles from? I just collect them over time, Jenny. So there are puzzle books that I've got. You can find puzzle websites on the internet. And I'm just really careful that whenever I use puzzles, they have to be really simple puzzles, so they can't be too hard because you want somebody to get the answer. You don't want them to be too easy where everyone gets it straight away. And also, obviously, got to be careful of copyright and things like that. So that's why I don't use the optical illusion things because it would require me to draw the illusions myself rather than taking something that I've got off the internet because that would be a breach of copyright. Whereas puzzles like this, it's just a bit of clip art and then lines and I made up the rest of it just using PowerPoint PowerPoint tools. So yes, Jenny says, Jenny asks, are you building your own graphics but using the concept? Exactly right, Jenny. That's exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so Graham asked a question. In fact, this is a good one to finish off on this. With this on is what do I reckon are the 3 best ways to shift energy in my experience? So in my opinion, and this is what I found just from my webinars, the things that really work are having multiple voices. So as much as possible, I will try to turn microphones on and get questions in it, get people to speak out loud. It means I don't get to filter them beforehand, but I will do that, and that works. The other thing that works really well for engagement, it's not on this list, but I mentioned it earlier, is to have lots and lots of visuals. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean lots of slides. It could be a visual where that builds up over time. Oh, actually, I've got build slides here. But have many more visuals than you would have in an in-person presentation. And okay, so what's the third one? The third one, look, I think polls work really well. Yeah, probably polls. The other thing I would say is a clear structure, Graham. And even though that's not here, we'll get to that a little bit later because it's not specifically a tool, it's more in your preparation. But having a really clear structure in a webinar helps a lot. So you've seen me do this already. So you've seen that I've already told you, here are the 8 things we're going to do. Here's the order in which we're going to do them. And we're now up to number 1, and we're going to go on to number 2, and so on. Because people in a webinar, because they're there to learn and they want to know roughly where they're up to it every time, have a really clear structure. So those would be my top 3. So two that you can see there, as well as clear structure. Okay, speaking of which, let's move on to the second one, which is how to go beyond PowerPoint. So this is about visuals and about multiple windows, which a couple of people asked about. Okay, so the first thing is actually get better at your PowerPoint, because as I said before, in a webinar, your slides are the visuals. So you just have to put more work into them, more preparation, and actually do more of them than you would in an in-person presentation. So I obsess over my slides, and my slides are pretty good compared to what you see on most webinars. And I've seen even people who are teaching webinars, teaching people how to do webinars, they just have slides with bullet points on them. I just don't think you should do that. So let me give you five hints on doing better visuals, then I'll stop and answer any questions about this. There is also a webinar recording in the Vault about how to do visuals, and an ebook that I've written, a special report that I've written that I'll give you the link to. The first thing is, as I said, use more slides or definitely more visuals. So you can see now that this slide, excuse me, the second one is make them more visual, and you can see on this slide that it's not just bullet points, even though what I've really got here is really 5 bullet points, but it looks better. Okay, so it looks better than just a normal bullet list. I mentioned this before, and you can see this in action here. Build your complex slides step by step. So you can see I'm doing that now. So rather than show all 5 bullet points at once, I'm showing them one at a time. Make them load faster, so don't use big photographs on them. Don't use fancy backgrounds. In particular, don't change your background from slide to slide. In fact, actually, let me do the fifth one. And the fifth one is actually create them faster. So get good at creating slides. If you're using PowerPoint on both PC and Mac, use a feature called SmartArt, which will create these more visual slides from what was just a bullet list. Okay, so just look at PowerPoint SmartArt, and this slide, these 5 things here, started off as a simple bullet list. But by using SmartArt, I could make them into these kind of rounded rectangles with these nice little gradient colors as you go down the list. Jenny asks about slide design. Is a black background okay for loading, or does white load faster? It doesn't matter, Jenny. Either one of those will load at the same speed. The key is don't change the background from slide to slide, because the way that the webinar technology works, particularly tools like GoToWebinar and even some of the others, the way it works is it has to send you, so from my computer, GoToWebinar is sharing what's on my screen, and it has to send you whatever changes on the screen from slide to slide. So if I'm doing these slides one step at a time, so let me go back here. So if I'm doing these one bullet point at a time, not very much changes from step to step, so actually it transmits very quickly, because it doesn't have to send you the whole slide each time, it just has to send you what's changed. Similarly, when you go from slide to slide, I've got a white background for all these slides, and there's a lot of white on all these slides, so that means that less has to change, which means it is faster to transmit. If I had a big photo on this slide, and then I had a big photo on the next slide, then switching from one slide to the next, a lot has to change. Okay, because the colors on almost every little pixel on your screen will change. So that's why sometimes slides lag behind the presenter, because the presenter has used big photos or they've used a background that changes. So the answer to your question, Jenny, it doesn't matter whether it's black or white, just keep it the same each time. And use smaller photos. So there's a photo coming up now, so you can see it here. But again, that's not much has changed from before the photo to after the photo. So that should have come up pretty quickly on your screen. This, by the way, is a special report that I wrote for Citrix, which is a company that makes GoToWebinar. So I worked with them to write this report about, and I wanted to call it Designing Better Visuals, but they said, let's call it the secret formula for webinar presentations that work every time, because they thought that visuals were so important that they were happy to call it, the secret formula. So if you want to read a little bit more about what I've done, these suggestions here, then you can get that, and that's in the eGurus Vault as well. It's just a free download there. It's also available on the Citrix site, but it's easier for you to find it in the eGurus Vault. Just ask me some other questions about webinar visuals here before we look at multiple windows. Okay, so no specific questions there. Can you show the bullet point thing? Yeah, let me show you how to do the bullet points just using SmartArt. So let me show you some examples of bad slide design and good slide design. And then I'll drop out of my slideshow and I'll show you how this SmartArt thing works. So here's a typical webinar slide. Okay, so if you're talking about Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, people will do it like this, just bullet points. Okay, that's it. Then don't do it that way because that's boring. Then people switch to the other extreme, and you'll see a lot of this in-person presentations, which is fantastic, where they'll just have a big picture and then just a small just a title or a slogan or a caption to go along with the picture. Don't do that in webinars either, because for the reason I just said, which is that it's slow to transmit across the internet. So instead, here are 3 options that are better. One, which is very plain, but is still better than having that first one, is just simply have a slide with just a title on them. And quite often when I start preparing my webinars, this is what I'll do. I'll create slides like this. They don't end up like that, but this is just a placeholder. And I have seen people run webinars like this, where a lot of their slides just have 1 point on them, just like that. I think it's a bit plain, but it's still better than this, which is overcrowded. Okay, so that one's all right. A better way is to do it like this, which if you look at these, it's actually the same content on this slide as there is on this slide. It's just that this one looks a lot better because it's much more visual. And that's what SmartArt does, which I'll show you. So that's good. And the other option is then take it one step further and add some graphics in there if you want to. So meaningful graphics. And again, SmartArt will do that for you. Okay, so Jenny asked a question. How easy is it to unbuild a model when you have created it as a whole? Jenny, do you want to turn your microphone on and ask a question if you have one? I think I know what you're asking, but I'd just like to be absolutely clear about that. Okay, so Jenny has raised her hand, so I'll do that.
Hi.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, I was just thinking about the sort of, because we've developed the habit of building models as an entirety, and so now I'm looking at them thinking how much effort and work is involved in unbuilding them effectively in order to build them up on slides.
Yeah.
So have you changed the way you build models now so that you always build them in bits?
Yes, you're talking about building them in PowerPoint, right? So how do you create them in PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yeah, so good question. So the secret that I use, Jenny, is I create the model first and then take bits out. Okay,
Right.
It's easier to take bits out than to build and create a series of slides. So I haven't got an example here, but you can imagine, like if you're going to build up a slide in bits, you can either do it by using the animation feature in PowerPoint, or let's say your model has 4 parts to it, you could just have 4 separate slides. Each one's got a bit more detail in it. Would that work? Is that the sort of thing that you have in mind?
Yes, and actually the concept of taking bits out sort of makes sense. And I'm just wondering, I guess the technology's there to, even if you need to just effectively mask bits of your slide.
Exactly. So let me do one.
So that you then end up with 4 builds and use them the other way around.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Yeah.
Let me do that. We're among friends here, so I'm dropping out of PowerPoint, and this may go wrong just because of the technology and we're just jumping in and out of windows, but let me demonstrate that for you. I was going to demonstrate anyway how to use the SmartArt, so let me do that. So I think what Jenny's talking about is, let's say we have a slide here, and let's make it very, very simple. Okay, so we're going to put in here 4 of these. Okay, so we're going to create a slide which is a basic quadrant model. There are better ways of doing this with SmartArt, but I'm just going to use something simple here. Okay, so those are the four bits, and we've done whatever we need to do to align them and make them the right colors and so on. So let me just change a couple of colors here. Okay, so there's my slide, which I want to build up step by step because I want to make those 4 points. So the way I do that, rather than have I'd build up the model first and then take that slide and create 4 copies of it. So let me do that for you here. Okay, so you can see on the left hand side I've now got 4 copies of it. So then you do it in reverse. So this, the 4th one, is going to be the full model. This one's going to be the full model minus that. This one's going to be the full model minus those 2. And this one's just going to have the first one on it. So when I run it in slideshow mode, which I just do now, so I'm talking about step 1, then I press my mouse button and step 2 appears, then step 3, then step 4. Is that what you meant, Jenny?
Yes, yes, it is, and that certainly looks nice and straightforward and easy.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And the audiences know that there are 4 slides. I could have also gone into PowerPoint's animation thing here and said, if I only had the 1 slide here, so let me delete those first 3. I could have gone into animation here and make that one appear, then make that one appear, then make that one appear, and that one appear. And then when I run the slideshow, here's step 1, click to step 2, click to step 3, click to step 4. I tend to do it this way with the animation, but I have done it the other way as well, where you just have multiple slides. And there's really no difference. Really the only difference is if you're going to give people a PDF of the slides later, then you may want to delete all the intermediate bits if you're doing it the first way.
Yeah. I've got a new designer who's building some models for me, and I guess what this is a good reminder that once the model's built, I then need her to go back and deliver the constituent parts back.
Yeah, that's right.
So that I've got effectively multiple versions of all the pieces so that they can build back up again.
Yeah, exactly, Jenny. Exactly right. And you used the word mask earlier as well. So just for people who aren't quite sure what that was, you could also start with this model and just put a white box over the bits that you don't want to show, and that you could build up your model that way as well. So I've done one which has got 4 objects that are very conveniently displayed. But if I had something where it wasn't so easy to have 4 objects and remove each one, you just mask them out, like just put a white box over it. I think that's what you meant, isn't it, Jenny?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a number of ways to do this, but the key is just make sure that you actually have got that you're using something that will build. Because the other advantage of this is now, even though it's 1 slide, it's got 4. There are in effect 4 visuals here. So you're getting your audience looking at your screen 4 times rather than just the once. Otherwise, they just look at it once, and if it's complex, they'll get confused the first time they see it anyway. So this removes some of the confusion, but also gets them looking back at the screen, which is really what you want them to do.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Jenny. You're welcome. So let me just show you the Smart Art, which somebody, I forget who, asked me about that as well. So look, another way of creating this, if you have 4 points, and this is how I do how I start my presentations now in preparation. I'll say I want a new slide. Oops, I need one with content on there. So let's say we're going to talk about 4 big social media platforms. Okay, I'll create this slide here called social media, the big 4. Now if I showed that, that's a boring slide. Okay, unfortunately lots of webinar presenters show slides like that, but it's a boring slide. This is what Smart Art lets you do. So Smart Art here converts this into a number of different formats. So here's one. I can say, okay, I want these in a vertical bullet list like this. Oh, let's say Facebook. Let's even do 900 million. Okay, LinkedIn. Okay, so Google. So even if I have this double bullet list, so Smart Art will put it in this format for me. If I don't like that format, I can put it in various other things. It's various other options that Smart Art will give me for formatting. So just with one click, I can make the slides look a lot more attractive. Okay, so I can do these options, which just changes the look of the slide without much effort on my part. So it started off as just a bullet list. I can change the color scheme. And now I've got a slide which looks quite attractive. Okay, so that's what the audience will see. If I want to then build that step by step, just what I was talking about with Jenny earlier, I can also, in animations, I'll say I want that to appear one by one. Okay, so now it starts off with a slide like that. And I'm just clicking as I go through. Okay, so suddenly I've built up this quite attractive slide, which allows me to talk to it for quite a while, and it was just done in a minute because it's starting off from a bullet list. So that's the value of SmartArt. It's not available in Keynote, but it is available on PowerPoint on the Mac as well. Any questions about that? Okay, let's continue. All right, so people asked about multiple windows, so let's move on to that. And it's actually there's two things: there's switching windows, there's multiple windows. So it depends on the technology that you use, by the way, as to how this is supported. So GoToWebinar has a number of different ways of doing it. Oh, Jenny says she's got a question. So let me go back to that, Jenny. I assume you want your microphone on, so I'll do that. Go ahead, Jenny.
Sorry, just quickly on finishing off on that last topic. Yeah, hi. Just finishing off on that last topic. Have you got people who've had success using the PowerPoint to build those and then dropping them into Keynote?
No, I don't know that would work.
Ah.
Because
I did wonder if I could use the PowerPoint on Mac to take advantage of that feature and then just move the slides across. But I
don't think so. I think it's built into, I think it's a feature of PowerPoint rather than a feature of the slides. I even noticed that if you save it as an old version of PowerPoint, PowerPoint will warn you that, hey, the SmartArt animations won't work. So I think it only works on PowerPoint.
That's interesting.
And Anne says the same thing. I've copied and pasted SmartArt from PowerPoint to Keynote, but it doesn't do the animations. So you see the visual, but it doesn't do the animations.
Oh, well, that's good to know.
Yep, and Hugh says something similar and also asks, I have my slides branded in Keynote using a template. How do I create the same template in PowerPoint so I can then use SmartArt? I think you just had to get the template copied across to Keynote. Hugh, I'm not exactly sure how to do that. Either reconstruct it or I don't know if there's a way to save your Keynote. Well, you can save your Keynote in PowerPoint format and then use it, I guess. And that's actually what Anne's saying as well. You can export Keynote to PowerPoint slides. I'm just not sure whether you can export a Keynote template to a PowerPoint template. But that doesn't matter because you can just take a basic Keynote template, save it, and use it as your starting point. Okay, I'll leave that for you guys to figure out because that's one I'm not sure of, and I'm sure just doing a Google search on converting PowerPoint Keynote templates to PowerPoint will give you the start in the right direction there. So just looking at multiple windows, so looking at this idea of switching windows, it's not something that you have to do, by the way. So sorry, Hugh, I can see your hand raised, so let me turn your mic on as well.
Hi. Hi, Gian. Yeah, I mean, I love the SmartArt stuff, but having become committed to Keynote, it is a pain. You can't easily do it. So I'm just assuming for the webinars I've got coming up, I'm going to have to use PowerPoint just for the speed of SmartArt. But I tried to get my template from Keynote to PowerPoint, and I must admit I've got myself into all sorts of trouble. It didn't seem to be that easy, funnily enough.
But isn't it, Hugh, isn't it just a matter of saving your Keynote presentation as PowerPoint?
Well, what I created, well, yes, you can save your Keynote presentation as PowerPoint and create all the transitions, but obviously that doesn't help you in terms of the SmartArt stuff that you want to create. You can then build your slides in. I just wanted to create a nice standard template in PowerPoint, so as your starting palette whenever you're creating new slides, that it's got your logo wherever you want it, and it's got the title bar looking how you want it, and those things.
Yep, that definitely sounds like an Apple tech support question.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. I just wondered if somebody knew that would be quick, but I'm sure I'll figure it out at some stage.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. And it looks like from the comments other people have been typing that they've had the same issue as well.
Yeah, and I can certainly add, in terms of if you create SmartArt and then try and take it into Keynote, the trouble is it sends it basically as a one JPEG. So you'd have to do the 4-slide build-up of your 4 bullet points in PowerPoint and send over 4 slides would be my advice.
Yep, exactly. If you're going to do it that way, but then you lose out the value of the fast creation of SmartArt.
No, what I'm saying is you create the slides in PowerPoint quickly with SmartArt, and just as you demonstrated to us earlier, create 4 copies of the 4-quadrant model and delete them so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then just take those 4 slides across to Keynote and you're done.
Yeah, that's right. It's I'm just going to turn your mic off for a sec, Hugh, because I'm getting feedback. The only challenge with that is that when you do that, because SmartArt tries to be smart, if you've got a slide with 4 points, it will fill the screen, so there'll be 4 narrow columns. As soon as you take one out, then they expand to fill the width. So you have to fiddle around with it, or as I mentioned, and as Jenny mentioned earlier, you mask out bits by hiding bits of the slide. So it's a little bit more fiddly, but yeah, it's absolutely doable.
Yeah, I think what I've decided is I'll just do webinars in PowerPoint, to be honest, where you want to be able to create a lot of slides quickly.
Yep, I agree, and I'm sure that Apple
you're
will...
not getting paid what you're getting to do a keynote or a training session, so speed is, I think, what it's all about, isn't it?
Yep, exactly, and I'm sure that Apple will catch up at some point, and they'll build some sort of feature into Keynote which will allow you to do the same thing.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. So looking at this idea of multiple windows, okay, so I just want to make the point that you don't have to do this. For me, I find it really useful because my topic lends itself to switching over to a web browser window from time to time. But for a lot of people, you don't need to do that. All you've got is your PowerPoint or your Keynote slide presentation, and that's all you need. However, if you do want to switch between windows, you can do that. And it's actually not that hard to do. If you're using GoToWebinar, so a lot of the webinar software doesn't allow you to do this, or if they do, they allow it in a kind of restrictive way. So GoToWebinar, the way it works is it just shows whatever's on your screen. And you can choose which window you're showing on your screen. So at the moment, I'm showing you my PowerPoint presentation, but I can switch, and let me do that now. If I've just switched over now to my web browser window. So now I can do anything I want on my web browser, and you'll be able to see that. I can also switch it in such a way that you can see both windows at the same time. So let me do that for you. So GoToWebinar gives me the choice to show what's on my whole screen. So that should be coming up soon. Yeah, so now you can see that here's my web browser window here, and also here's my PowerPoint window. So if whatever I'm doing on the screen here, I can switch between them. Oops, I didn't mean to go to the next slide there, but so GoToWebinar does give you that choice. In fact, you can see another window hiding behind here, which is just my a documents window that I've got. The cleanest way of doing it is just to switch between windows. So here so rather than showing your whole screen with the background and all the multiple windows on there, just only show one window at a time. Okay, so I'm switching back to PowerPoint now, and I'll switch to my web browser. Okay, a couple of hints if you're doing this. If you do want to do this or you want to take advantage of it, a couple of hints. Firstly, if you're going to show web pages or open documents or anything like that, have them open already. So do that in your preparation. So I don't have anything specific to show you, but if I did, I would have these tabs opened here and already set up. So if I want to be on my blog, I'd make sure that was open beforehand. For a couple of reasons. One, obviously, it's wasting a bit of time now to go to that page, and also you just want to make sure that it works reliably, that the website is up and hasn't crashed for some reason, or it's not going to do like what it's doing here, like popping up a little window. So you want to make sure you've gone through all that. If you're going to scroll down further down the page, then you do the scrolling beforehand, so that's all ready for you. The other thing is that just and actually, I think Amanda asked a question, doesn't it get confusing when you're switching between windows? And absolutely does. So just be very, very clear when you're switching. So whenever I'm switching windows, I say to people, I'm just going to switch now, and we can switch back to PowerPoint. Okay, and then I'll do it. So people know what's happening. Otherwise, they see these things changing on their screen. It may be obvious to you, but it's not so obvious to them. Any questions about that? Because this is something that people did ask about. How do you do switching windows? I don't have a lot to say apart from that, but if you have any other questions, please ask. Okay, good. Let's continue then. So we're up to step 3 of 8, or topic 3 of 8, which is all about how to facilitate discussions. Remember, as I said at the start, that I've done these in the order order of popularity, or the order that people asked about them. So I have spent most time in the first few, and in fact most of our time is going to be spent in the first 4 or 5. And so don't worry about the fact that we've gone an hour already, because these are the ones that people did want all the detail on. So we will finish at in half an hour's time, but I've timed it so that we spend most of our time in the first few. So if you're doing discussion, so if you're going to facilitate a discussion, and I do this regularly, there are certain ideas and certain techniques you can use if you're going to facilitate a discussion. First of all, be open to the idea that you're going to do it. And if you're going to do it, allow time for it. So I do this every month or every 6 weeks or so. I run a social media and internet marketing forum, which is just a Q&A session. And it's not even people asking me questions, although it sometimes sends out that way, but it's for people to ask questions, share ideas, contribute their own bits, and other people will respond to them. So that's something that I've been doing for the last couple of years now, since I started last year, so maybe for 18 months. And I've just discovered a few things about that, and some people on today's webinar know about that as well, because they're already on it. Decide how much is going to be presentation and how much is going to be discussion. So just think about whether it's really going to be you presenting with time for questions, or is it going to be mostly a facilitation. Let me check who's got their hand raised. So Graham, I'll just turn your mic on. I think you've got a question. Let me just turn your mic on, Graham.
Hi, Gihan. One of the things about the discussion is how, I guess, familiar your audience is with webinar technology. I've found in some of mine that people are using it for the first time or not very often, and they seem to be much more reticent to be engaged in a verbal discussion rather than just writing a thing in the text box. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, actually, let me go on to the next slide, because I was going to mention that. So one of the things I do to frame it up is always tell people there are 2 ways you could participate. And if you've got a microphone and you can turn your microphone on, or raise your hand, I'll turn your microphone on. If you don't want to speak out loud, or you're worried about background noise, then type it in the question box. And I find that that's very true, Graham, and it depends very much on the audience. So for us, because we're speakers and we're used to doing that, we're happy to turn microphones on, but there are other people who just don't want to. They don't want their voice heard, not for confidentiality reasons. They're just, as you say, they're reticent to do that. So I always give people the option when I'm facilitating to I always make it clear that they can type their questions or comments in the question box. And also sometimes for certain topics, I'll just make it clear that I'm going to keep it anonymous, so they can type their comments and I won't read out who's typed it. I'll just tell them what it is.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. The other thing that I do here is, actually Janelle's asked an interesting question about, is there somewhere you could send your virgin participants for a quick demo on how to participate? So I haven't done that, Janelle, specifically, but one thing I do is frame it up early. So generally, I won't start by asking people to turn on their microphones and talk about and speak early in the webinar. I might get them to do that a little bit later, but you start off by it's ramping up the interaction basically. So I've seen a number of webinar presenters where they start off by just saying, hey, look, you can participate in 2 ways. Why don't we just test the question box, but just type in where you are from and what the weather's like. So people go, oh, Perth sunny, Adelaide rainy, or whatever. And that's a way for people to just get used to the idea that they can participate, and in a very no risk environment. And then the presenter will say something like, oh, Gihan's from Perth and it's sunny over there, great. And that's an easy way for people to start participating, and then you build up the interaction later, build up the engagement later. The other thing you can do, of course, is to have a couple of people primed with their questions in advance. So not that you feed them Dorothy Dixer questions, but that you have them ready to speak, so that if nobody else is doing it, then one of your mates or your close colleagues or somebody who's on there can start with the questions just to get the ball rolling. The other thing that I do in the frame-up of this social media and internet marketing forum is I just make the rules very clear. So I do have this slide at the start, and that's half the slide. But the other half is, let me do this. I say, look, here's a chance for you to ask questions, so feel free to ask whatever questions you like. And also add your comments and contributions. So don't think of me as the only person who's answering questions. I'd like you to contribute to the discussion as well. Be careful, because we're recording this, so be careful of anything private or confidential, and we're all equal in this group. So don't feel that just because you're new to social media or internet marketing that you've got nothing of value to contribute. Okay, so I do just a brief spiel to get people used to the idea that, hey, you're going to get value from this if you participate. And I really want you to participate, and don't expect me to don't expect to sit back and for me to do all the work. Another thing I will do, and I've done this occasionally with some groups, with smaller groups, is that I'll do this. So I'll actually take the people who've registered, and again with our group it's easy because everyone wants a photo on their site, so this is very easy. I just took the photos of the eGuru site and I have that on there. In fact, what I've sometimes done when the group doesn't know each other well is whenever somebody is speaking, so when Graham was speaking, I'll take my little spotlighter and move it over Graham. When Jenny is speaking, I'll do that, so that the rest of the group knows who's speaking and can put a face to the name and to the voice. And I found that's quite useful, and people like that when there are people they don't know in the group. Obviously, you can't do that if you haven't got photos, or if you've got a group where you just don't know who's going to be there. So Jenny's asked a question: when would you bring another person in to help, and have you used someone helping in a different room or place? Yes, Jenny. So I think Jenny's asking about moderators and bringing in hosts. So I've done both. So I've done webinars by myself, like I'm doing here, and I've done webinars where I've been the guest and somebody else is the host or the moderator, and I've also been the host for when I've brought in guest presenters for my network. So look, I think when the numbers get bigger, then it's useful to have somebody if you still plan to make it interactive, because otherwise all you can do is present. Have you used somebody who's in another room or place? Yeah, and every time I've done it, they have been in another room or place. So they're just somebody else who's a moderator or a shared presenter or organizer on the call, and they could be anywhere. So the last time I did it, she was in Sydney and I was in Perth, and there were people all around Australia and New Zealand. So if you've got a big enough group, do that. It just means as soon as you bring in multiple presenters, it just adds another layer of complexity. Though you just got to be really clear with the people that you're working with, what your roles are. So there are some presenters, there's some moderators and hosts who want to jump in all the time and they want to add their 2 cents worth. That's fine if you frame it out, if you know it beforehand and you frame it up to your audience that they're almost a co-presenter, not just a moderator. Anything else? Oh, Anne says yes. For people who are a bit reticent to be identified, Anne says I also tell them they can type anon before their comment. Yeah, so if you normally read out people's names like I just did, but you can tell people beforehand if you don't want your name mentioned, then just type the word anon at the start of it, and I won't mention your name. Jenny says, what with the tipping number? I don't think there's an exact answer for that, Jenny. I think it's just a matter of what you think is going to be for a particular presentation where you think that I really need somebody else to help me with the logistics because I want to focus on the presentation. And it will vary. It will vary. I'm happy to do a presentation with a few hundred people without a moderator, but it just means that it's not going to be I won't have as much time to answer people's questions because I won't be sitting in the background filtering them and choosing them. Okay, so sometime, like in the last hour or so, there's been a number of people who've asked the same question. And because I'm the only one managing this, I have to scroll through the list and go, oh, sorry, Hugh asked the exact same question, so I hope I've answered that to you. So I've got to do that. Whereas if you've got a moderator, they can filter them out and they don't need to they can only look at the ones that they can only raise the ones that they want to or that are on topic at the moment. The best thing you can do for facilitating, to facilitate discussion, is to do it. It's quite unnerving, I found, when I first started doing it. They were actually the most nerve-wracking presentations, because I don't know what's going to come up. I don't know whether there's going to be enough people turn up or anyone going to turn up at all. I don't know what questions are going to be asked. I don't know whether I'm going to have expertise in the room to answer them. So it can be a bit unnerving, but just like anything else, you just get used to it. Janelle, I can see you've got your hand raised, so I'll just turn your mic on. Oh, it's a bit of background noise, Janelle, but let's see how we go.
Is that better?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, so I wanted to just ask about multiple presenters. Presumably, if you have planned when they start speaking, then you open their mic. But if they do want to add something to a comment that you're making, I guess an interjection, how would you best facilitate that?
Yeah, so this is where you've got to be. I'm getting a bit of feedback, Janelle, so I'll just turn your mic off while I'm speaking. This is where you just got to be really clear with your team before you start. So when I was doing this webinar for 200 people with the Dynamic Business Magazine in Sydney, so we had the moderator, so she was the editor of the magazine. They had me as a presenter, and we had James from Citrix, who was actually there in the background just in case anything went happen with the technology that had to be sorted out. So we were really clear that, like James said, look, I'm just going to be in the background. Just keep an eye on the chat box. I won't say anything, but I might type something in the chat box if I need to. And I was just happy to work with as the presenter with the moderator who was actually speaking out loud and asking questions as she went along. So Lorna was basically, she was also not presenting anything. She was just there as the host. So she was only going to interject if she had questions that people had asked, or if something went wrong, like they couldn't see my screen for some reason. So you just got to decide that beforehand, and also decide who's going to manage what. So Lorna was the organizer of the webinar, which meant that she was the only person who could turn microphones on and off. And I was the presenter, so I couldn't. So when it got to Q&A time, she had to turn mics on or read out the questions. I couldn't do that. I was just a presenter, and I could completely focus on that. And you really need to decide this beforehand. So who's going to have control of the buttons, and when are you going to interject? And you know, there's no problem with people interjecting, actually, by the way. So most webinar audiences are okay if you've got multiple presenters and somebody says, oh look, I just need to say something here. That's okay, as long as it doesn't become excessive and you don't feel like they're taking over what the presenter should be doing. I'll turn your mic back on, Janelle, in case you want to ask something more about that.
No, that's good. That pretty much answers what I was looking for. Thanks, Gihan.
Great, thanks. Okay, any other questions about this facilitating thing? As I said, the best thing you can do is actually just do it. And I'd recommend starting off with a small group, a small trusted group, and just facilitate a webinar and just get over those initial, the nerves and the uncertainty of what it's like facilitating. Okay, so now we're getting into the things that weren't so popular, but I had them on my list. So I do want to cover them briefly because I know some people, even if you didn't reply to the survey, you might be interested in this part of it as well. The first one, setting up a webinar series, which it's easy to do in GoToWebinar, and the main thing I want to suggest here is that you do it. I know Hugh and some other people have a need to do it anyway, so you will be doing this, where in GoToWebinar, when you set up a webinar, you can say, I want this to be recurring. And one thing that a lot of people don't know is that, so it gives you the options of daily, weekly, monthly. But once you schedule those times, you can then go in and change them. So I run my free public webinar series twice a month on the first and third Thursday of the month. So some months, so it's almost every 2 weeks, but not always, because sometimes there are 5 Thursdays in a month. So it looks like when you set up the webinar and GoToWebinar, it looks like you can't do that because it only gives the option of daily, weekly, monthly, but actually you can. So I set up mine as weekly, and then just went in and deleted the weeks that I wasn't going to be running a webinar. So GoToWebinar does allow you to do that. When you set up a webinar, you can say, I want this to be recurring. And I think you've set up your webinar like that, because your webinar series like that, because you've got these webinars that are going to come in between particular workshops. So you can also add new sessions as you want to. So I use this webinar series as it's like my email newsletter where people subscribe to it and then they just keep getting the next webinar in the series without having to sign up to each one. And if they're not interested in attending one, that's fine. They just don't. They just don't turn up. But they don't have to make the choice every time whether they're going to attend or not. So I reckon if you're running free webinars, unless it's definitely just going to be a one-off webinar, consider running it as a series. So say sign up to my free webinar series, just like you would say sign up to my newsletter, which is different from saying sign up to this webinar, and then I might send you an invitation to another one in the future. Okay, so webinar series are particularly useful when you don't want people to have to make the decision each time as to whether to sign up or not. Is there anything else you want to ask about that, the people who were interested in setting up webinar series? I did want to make that point that you can't, with the webinar series, it looks like you can only schedule them every day, week or month, but you can actually change the dates later. Hugh, I can see you've got your hand raised.
Just to clarify on that date piece, Gihan, so I'm scheduling a webinar every month for the next 4 months. They're not falling on the same day of the month. Do I set it up as the same day of the month and then go back and manually change it to any day for each month individually?
Yep, exactly.
Totally
yep, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So just set it up in the sequence that you think is most likely for them and most convenient, and then you can go in and juggle anything. So you can see here on the screen here, I can change the date, the time, the start and end time. So once I've got these dates in here, I can change them to anything I like, or even add new ones.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Okay, anyone else with that? Setting up a webinar series is pretty easy. I just really want to get you thinking about the idea that if you're going to run free webinars in particular, then you should do it that way. Or at least, I shouldn't say should, but consider doing it that way. Okay, I can see someone's got a comment. Another question on multiple presenters. Yep, actually, Janelle, let's do that because I've got that as number 8. But since you're interested in it, and we've already talked about that in facilitating, let's bring that one forward. And Janelle, I'll turn your microphone on again.
Thanks, Gihan. So with multiple presenters, if you have 2 presenters in different locations, running slides and doing as you've done where you've highlighted things and you've written on things and you've done examples, how do you manage that with 2 different people from 2 different locations?
Yeah, again, this is one of those things that you coordinate beforehand, but basically you only show one person's screen. Okay, so if
you only show one person's
screen.
Right.
Okay, now you can swap screens, but at any time, let's say you and I are multiple presenters, the audience is either seeing my screen or your screen, but not both.
Okay, so that's the key thing I wanted to understand, because in our case it would be me presenting one part of the module and then someone else presenting another part, and we both might want to do something where we're drawing or demonstrating, but only in our own sections.
That's right. That's right. So you can, at GoToWebinar, we'll let you switch presenters. So you can set up, when you set up your webinar, you can say invite, so I can say invite Janelle Wallace as a presenter, and then you'll get then at any time during my webinar, I can change presenter to you, which means it swaps over to your screen, and you do whatever you want with your keyboard and mouse and your slideshow, and then then you can change it back to me as well when you're done.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So just for other people, because it sounds like, Janelle, you will actually need to do it that way, but just for the benefit of others, what I often do is, like, again, for this webinar where I had a host and a moderator, they have some slides at the start that they say, welcome to GoToWebinar, and here's a bit about dynamic business. What we did was they sent their slides to me, and we put that, we topped and tailed my presentation with those slides so that we didn't switch presenters. So we didn't have to go through that switching from one person to the other. It was just like when the webinar started, we started with their slides, they spoke, I knew when to switch to move their slides forward, and then they just shut up and I got on with my presentation. So if you can do that, then that's so much better if you don't need to switch presenters and switch screens, because that's just one other thing that could go wrong. And if you can avoid that from happening, then do like avoid it from happening. It's not always practical. And Janelle, it sounds like in your case, each person needs to have control, so you need to switch.
Yes. So we would need to switch. Okay.
Yes. So if you need to switch, switch. Okay. But if you can get by without it, then it's better. It's just one less thing that can go wrong.
Okay. Thanks.
Cool. You're welcome. Okay. So then, looking at this idea of payments. Okay, taking payments in webinars is surprisingly easy. Although I'm surprised at how many people don't know how to do it. And I found this as a webinar group on LinkedIn, which I'm a member of, and a number of people asked, like, how do you take payments for a webinar? Like, GoToWebinar doesn't have a payment system built in. So how do you do that? Do you have to learn another webinar or switch to another system? It's actually not that hard at all. And basically, there's 3 steps. I just want to show you that this is these are the steps that are involved, and I think then you just go to your webmaster, or you may even know how to do it yourself to actually make it happen. But just understand the concept is that they pay before they register for the webinar. So the first thing is that the customer goes in through whatever shopping cart they're using, or through something like PayPal, and they pay for your webinar. So you advertise it on your website just like any other product. You have a big buy now button or add to cart button, and they pay for it. Then the shopping cart needs to be able to send people to the registration page. Okay, so PayPal will do this. So with PayPal, you can say, after the customer purchases, send them to this page. And that's when you send them to the registration page. And then everything happens normally. So GoToWebinar sends them the confirmation email. I think where people get confused is that they think that these first 2 steps have to be done together. So they think that when they register, they have to enter credit card details. They don't do it that way. Well, GoToWebinar doesn't allow you to anyway. And even if you've got any other system that also doesn't allow payments, it doesn't matter. You get them to pay first and then send them to the registration page. And the only other thing I'll say about that is that you just keep an eye on the registrations coming in. So you'll get all the PayPal confirmation emails to show you who's paid, and then GoToWebinar won't tell you whenever somebody enrolls, which is good because you don't want to get all these emails all the time when you've got a big group. But what I do is a couple of days before my webinar, if it's a paid webinar, I'll have a look at the people who've registered for the webinar. I'll make sure that everyone who's paid has actually registered, and if they haven't, I'll just send them a friendly email saying, hey, you've forgotten to register, even though you've paid for it. So that's all you need to do to take payments for webinars. I know it confuses a lot of people, but it shouldn't. It's just fairly straightforward. Whatever shopping cart you're using, just take the payment first and then send them to the webinar registration page. Any questions about that? Okay, let me continue with running free webinars. So these are webinars, what I've called webinars that sell. I've actually got quite a detailed oh, sorry, Janelle's asked a question about, so could someone register but not pay? They can't register but not pay because they don't have they can't get to the enrollment page. The GoToWebinar enrollment page is not an easy address to guess. So the only way they could get to it is if they actually have registered. Okay, the only way they could get to it is if you've given them the link somehow, which is either because they're paid, or you may send them a link because you've given them a free registration or something like that. I hope that answered your question there, Janelle. Okay, the thing with free webinars is I've done a whole a webinar about that. On how to run free webinars, or I've called it webinars that sell. You can find it in the eGurus vault. So I don't want to waste your time by going through all of that again. The one thing I will say though is that you've got to send people reminders to free webinars to convince them to sign up and to turn up on the day. So there's this. Let me just show you this slide. There's this story which is actually not true. Apparently, it's a bit of an urban legend about Procter & Gamble, how they doubled their sales of shampoo by adding one word to their marketing. The story goes that on the back of the shampoo bottles it said lather and rinse, and some bright spark said, well, why don't we also add on there repeat? And that doubled their sales of shampoo. So apparently, I've looked it up, and apparently it's not a true story, even though it's quite often quoted as one. But the point is this: that you do need to repeat your reminders to people and repeat your promotions, especially when you've got free webinars. So I would recommend, if you're looking at a timeline, in terms of promoting your webinars, so getting people to register in the first place to a free webinar, don't do it any more than a month in advance, because people just aren't thinking that far ahead when they're thinking of webinars. If you're talking about free information seminars or information evenings or something, then you do need to let them know in advance. But with your promotion, with webinars, anything more than a month is a bit of a waste. Then a couple of weeks as well, do that. Do a reminder, and a couple of days before. So some people say that they get the most sign-ups happen 2 days before the webinar itself. And I think it's because people only have to set aside, say, an hour or half an hour, and so they're willing to wait till the last minute to see whether they can squeeze in the webinar. Now, that's some people. The other problem that happens, though, is that some people, when they get the first notice 1 month in advance, they look at their calendar and they go, yeah, at the moment I'm available that date, so if I'm still available at the time of the webinar, yeah, I'll turn up. Okay, so don't be surprised if you get a lot of people, a lot of no-shows, because people, when they register for webinars, they have the mindset that, yeah, let me put that in my calendar now so I don't forget about it, and if I'm still available at that time, if I don't get a better offer, then I'll turn up. That's just the way that people think about webinars, as opposed to in-person courses where they will typically think about, do I need to set aside half a day for the workshop, or do I need to pay for it, or do I need to think about where I'm going to be that day, and so on. So they think you get fewer no-shows for in-person workshops, but you will also get you get a bigger no-show rate for webinars. So just be aware of that. Graham says, in your experience, what length of webinar gets the greatest result? I think you're talking about your free webinars here, Graham. I've now, with my free webinars, I make them 30 minutes. Okay, so somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes seems to get the best results for these free promotional webinars. Tend not to make them longer than that, because people do drop off, even the ones who do turn up. They haven't made a commitment to it, so they're less likely to stay. So that typically seems to be 30 to 60 minutes. Oh, and Janelle says, yes, with the webinar series where you only register once, you can't really tell how many people will show up at the third one. And that's right, Janelle. So I've got like 300 people who've registered for my webinar series, and I get about 15 to 20% of them. So let's say between 10 and 20% of them at each one. So that's low, but I'm not too worried about that because they've registered for the series, and if they're not interested in a topic, they won't turn up for it. That doesn't matter. The other thing with your reminders is for the people who do register, send them reminders as well. Send them a week before, a day before, and an hour before. I've actually shown those 3 examples because that's what GoToWebinar does automatically. So you can change those, you can change those settings, but with GoToWebinar, it will automatically do that for you. Send the reminders a week, a day, and an hour before. Graham, I can see you got your hand raised.
Yes, Gihan. Just with regards to the series, can you just explain a little bit more about how that works? Like, you can set it up on GoToWebinar, and when people register, they're automatically registered for the next ones that come. Is that how it works? So you don't have to keep on, accessing people and reminding them and all that sort of stuff. That group is part of that one webinar series. Is that right?
Yep, exactly right. So let me switch over to my web browser here. And so I've got 2 of these webinars that run as a series. So this one here called Advanced Webinar Techniques is the one that we're on right now. But this other one above it, the Internet Business Revolution, that's the one that runs twice a month. And I've got it set up so you can see here it meets 7 times. So, and actually this is just the next 7. I can keep adding more of them as I go. So yes, so there's 4, actually I said 300, there's 400. So there's 408 people who've registered. They will get the reminders for each one of the webinars. And they can choose whether to turn up or not. But I've done it. I've just set it up once, and GoToWebinar takes care of everything else.
Great, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Is there anything else about the free webinars that you want to ask? As I said, I don't want to go through the stuff that's already in the other webinar recording that I've done, because it is there and I've done it in a lot more detail, so that is there for you if you want to. And there's also a chapter in the Webinar Smarts book called Webinars That Sell, that talk about things like writing a sales letter for your free webinar, how to promote it on social media. So those sort of things are covered as well. Okay. So then the other thing I want to show you is what you do, and this is actually, it follows on very cleanly from this idea of free webinars, is what you do to follow up after a webinar. Now in some webinars you may choose to do nothing at all because you've done the webinar for the educational material, that's all you do. But particularly if you've got free webinars, or if you've got webinars where the webinar is part of some other program, so here I know you're doing that, you may want to offer some sort of follow-up material, or you may want to follow up with people individually. And then there are a number of ways of doing that. Oops, this slide, I thought I'd animated this slide, but I haven't. So, okay, so with GoToWebinar, you can send, it will allow you to send follow-up material to the people who attended, that's what the tick means, and or to the people who registered but didn't attend. So you can do both. So for the people who attended, you send them and you can automate this. You can send a thank you email saying, thank you for attending. By the way, here's a link to the recording. And if you made an offer in the free webinar, then here's a repeat of the offer, and it's only available for 24 hours or whatever you've got. Similarly, for the people who registered but didn't attend, you can send a separate email saying, sorry, you couldn't make it, but by the way, here's a recording, just in case you are still interested in it. And here, and again, you can say, here's the offer that I made during the webinar. It's open to you as well because you registered. You can also, GoToWebinar has some reasonably powerful reporting tools where you can look at, it'll give you a report on who attended the webinar, what questions they asked in the question box. So it's things that people type in. You can see you've got a written record of it, and even what questions, how they answer the poll questions. So if you ask some sort of sales or marketing type questions, like the sort of things like, you know, how experienced are you with whatever, you know, or how good is your customer, let's say you're talking about customer experience, how good is your customer experience? Like, and you could give people 4 options from poor to great, and then depending on what they answered, you might decide to follow up with the people who said poor and say, look, you'd follow them up not only by email, but you could ring them if you got their phone number, or you could follow up in other ways. So you can look at the report to see what they've said, as well as how they responded to specific questions. So if you're really interested in getting full value from your webinars, as particularly the free ones, then you can follow up by just downloading the report from GoToWebinar. Any questions about that? Do you want to see an example of a report? No, I don't see any questions there. It's fairly easy. In GoToWebinar, it has the you just say I want a report, and it'll give you a report of both the registration and also of people who attended, and how long they were on the webinar, and what sort of things they said in the poll. Okay, I've pretty much covered everything I want to cover now. I know we've got multiple presenters, but I covered that earlier anyway, so I don't need to say anything more about multiple presenters. The only thing I was going to say about that was, which is something, I'll show you the slide, but we have really covered that anyway, which is that there are different ways of doing multiple presenters. So you could do an interview where you have a host and a guest. You could have the moderation, which is probably the most common kind, and you could even have a panel where you've got an MC and multiple speakers. The one danger with doing either of the first or the third, this moderation one, you've actually got a real presenter. Okay, so that's good because the presenter has their slides, they've got it structured. These other two, the interview and the panel, the danger is that it becomes too much audio and not enough visuals, because you're interviewing someone, so you don't really know what they're going to say, or if you've got a panel of speakers, you don't really know what they're going to talk about. So just think carefully about what you might do in terms of visuals, and if you haven't got any visuals to go along with it, then say for the panel one, you might just say, I'm going to have photos of the speakers, and like I did earlier, you might just highlight whichever speaker is speaking at the time. With the interview with the host and the guest, if you plan the interview in advance and you get the sequence right, then you can have slides for that. So for example, Maria Carlton interviewed me for her webinar series late last year, and she said, look, here are the 6 questions I'm going to ask you. Are they okay? And we went back and forth, and we ended up with just shifted the order around a bit and changed the wording, and then she was able to create a slide for each question, so that as we were going through the interview, even though it wasn't as many visuals as I would normally use, it still had some visuals for the audience, and they could see where we were in the interview. They could see that Maria had structured it really well, so they felt really comfortable that it had been organized and prepared well in advance. I've seen other interviews, which are just terrible because all it has is just one slide at the front introducing Joe Bloggs as speaker, and that slide stays on there for the whole webinar, which is the perfect reason for people to leave and check their email or whatever. In fact, in the last time I did that, I knew that they would be sending me a recording later, and because it was only audio, I knew that I'd be able to get the audio and just listen to it later. So I left the webinar because I knew there weren't going to be any visuals that would keep me engaged there. It's just one thing to be careful of if you're doing an interview, either within one person or a panel. Okay, folks, so that's it. That's it for today. I do want to ask you we covered a number of things today. I do want to just ask you, what are you going to take away and use? So you may have got some things from today's webinar that you'd like to use. If you just type in the question box, I will keep this anonymous because some people like to learn from what other people are using. So someone says multiple presenters. So what specific things do you think you can take away and use from today's session? Smart art, yep. Multiple presenters, good. Webinar series, showing the structure up front, great. Using puzzles and framing up participation. Interaction. Great. So thanks everyone. I hope you got some value from this. As I said, there are other resources in the eGurus Vault as well. So if you go to the webinar section, you'll get a number of both in-depth and overview resources. This is very much about taking webinars to the next level. I really think that webinars are still, even though they're becoming almost mainstream now, they still offer a really great opportunity for us to have a real point of difference as presenters, and not only just offering webinars as standalone, but as part of workshops and things. So some of the people here on today's webinar, I'll be speaking to you again later on this afternoon, because there'll be a planning webinar for an in-person workshop that I'm running. I know, Hugh, you're doing webinars that are part of in-person presentations, and more, I think that's the way that we're going to be using webinars. So get good at them, because they will make a difference to your business. Thanks everyone, and bye for now.